I didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. Sure, I'd read a few creepy stories, watched my share of horror movies, but the idea that something supernatural could seep into the real world always felt like nonsense. That was until last year, when I took a trip to help my friend Clara clear out her grandmother's old house. The place was a century-old Victorian home in the middle of nowhere, nestled at the edge of a forest that stretched for miles. Clara's grandmother Lillian had passed away a few months prior, and since Clara was the only family left, the daunting task of sorting through decades of accumulated belongings fell to her. She didn't want to do it alone, and I, being a good friend, agreed to tag along. We arrived in late afternoon, the sun dipping low behind the forest canopy, casting long shadows over the house. It was exactly the kind of place you'd expect to see in a ghost story. Tall, narrow windows, weathered gray siding, and a sagging porch that creaked with even the slightest touch. Clara unlocked the heavy front door with an old iron key, and it swung open with a groan that seemed to echo through the empty halls. The air inside was heavy, stale, and cold despite it being the middle of summer. Dust motes floated in the fading sunlight streaming through the windows, and the faint smell of mildew clung to everything. Clara sighed, clearly overwhelmed. "We'll just focus on one room at a time," she said, mostly to herself. The first few hours weren't particularly eventful. We started in the living room, sorting through stacks of yellowed newspapers, fragile photo albums, and an odd assortment of knickknacks. It was tedious, but not scary. At least, not yet. The weirdness began that evening. We decided to sleep in the house to save money on a hotel. Clara's grandmother's old bedroom was the only one with a mattress that wasn't completely ruined, so we set up sleeping bags on the floor. By the time we were ready to turn in, the house was pitch dark and eerily quiet, save for the occasional groan of wood expanding and contracting in the cool night air. I'd just started to drift off when I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I thought it might be the wind. But then it came again, clearer this time, like someone murmuring just outside the bedroom door. My heart thudded. I sat up, straining to listen, but all I could hear was Clara's steady breathing beside me. I peered out of bed and heard Clara start to move in the darkness inside. Her breathing was steady and regular. I told myself it was nothing, maybe the wind or an old pipe shifting somewhere in the house. I eventually fell back asleep, but it was restless, and I woke several times to the same soft, unintelligible whispers. The next morning, I mentioned it to Clara. She looked uneasy but shrugged it off. "This house has always been creepy," she admitted. "But it's probably just the old walls." We spent the day tackling the upstairs rooms. The house was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and small, cluttered spaces. In one of the spare bedrooms, we found a wooden chest filled with odd trinkets, a set of porcelain dolls with cracked faces, an ornate hand mirror tarnished with age, and, at the very bottom, a leather-bound journal. Clara flipped through the journal while I sorted through a box of clothing. "This was my grandmother's," she said, her voice tight. "She wrote about dreams." And I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. "What kind of voices?" "It's weird," she says. "They'd call her name or sometimes just whisper things she couldn't quite understand. She thought the house was alive, in a way, like it had its own consciousness." A chill ran down my spine, but I forced a laugh. "Old houses make weird noises," I said, more to reassure myself than her. "Your grandmother probably just had an overactive imagination." Clara didn't respond. That night the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. This time, I could make out my name, soft, drawn out like a breathy chant. Anna. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, seeping through the walls, the floorboards, the very air. I shook Clara awake. "Do you hear that?" She sat up groggily, but before she could answer, the whispers stopped. The silence that followed was oppressive, almost deafening. Clara looked at me like I was crazy. "I don't hear anything," she said. The next day I was on edge. Every creak, every shadow made my heart race. Clara tried to act normal, but I could tell she was spooked too. We decided to tackle the attic, the last part of the house we hadn't yet explored. The narrow staircase leading up to it was steep and dark, and the air grew colder with every step. The attic was packed with old furniture draped in white sheets, stacks of boxes, and something else. In the far corner, half hidden by shadows, stood a tall, ornate mirror. Its frame was carved with intricate patterns that seemed to writhe and twist when I looked at them too long. The glass was cracked, but not shattered, and it reflected the dim light in an unsettling way. "I don't remember ever seeing this before," Clara said, frowning. The mirror gave me an uneasy feeling, but I couldn't look away. As we stood there, the whispers began again. This time, Clara heard them too. Her face went pale, and she grabbed my arm. "Let's go," she whispered. But I couldn't move. The whispers seemed to be coming from the mirror now, faint and distant, but growing louder by the second. I stepped closer, drawn in despite the icy dread coiling in my stomach. For a moment, I thought I saw something in the cracked glass, a dark shape, shifting just beneath the surface. And then it spoke. "Leave." The voice was deep, guttural, and so loud it felt like it vibrated through my entire body. Clara screamed, and that broke whatever spell I was under. We bolted, slamming the attic door behind us and not stopping until we were outside in the cool night air. We didn't go back inside that night. Instead, we sat in Clara's car, trying to make sense of what had happened. Neither of us wanted to admit it, but we were terrified. Clara finally broke the silence. We need to finish tomorrow and get out of here. I'll sell the place, burn it down, I don't care, but I'm not staying." I nodded, but I wasn't sure I wanted to go back in at all. Sleep was impossible, and as I sat there, staring at the dark outline of the house, I thought I saw movement in one of the upstairs windows, a shadowy figure, watching us. The next morning we went back inside, determined to finish quickly. The house felt different, heavier, darker, even in the daylight. We worked in tense silence, packing up anything that seemed valuable and leaving the rest. By early afternoon, we were almost done. Then, Clara disappeared. One moment she was beside me in the dining room sorting through a stack of books. The next, she was gone. I called her name, my voice trembling, but there was no response. Panic set in, and I started searching the house, my heart hammering in my chest. I found her in the attic, standing in front of the mirror. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, her face pale as a sheet. "Clara?" I yelled, but she didn't react. I grabbed her arm and shook her, but she just kept staring at the mirror, murmuring something under her breath. I leaned closer and realized she was repeating the same phrase over and over. "It's coming." Suddenly, her reflection in the cracked glass moved, but Clara didn't. The thing in the mirror grinned, its mouth stretching far too wide, and reached out a hand. Before I could react, the glass shattered, and Clara collapsed. I dragged her out of the house, not stopping until we were in the car. She came to a few minutes later, dazed and confused, with no memory of what had happened. We left everything behind and drove away as fast as we could. Clara sold the house a few weeks later, though she refused to go back to finish clearing it out. The new owners, a young couple looking for a fixer-upper, moved in shortly after. I wanted to warn them, but Clara begged me not to. "They'll think we're crazy," she said. A month later, I saw a news article. The couple had vanished without a trace. The house is still there, sitting empty at the edge of the forest, and sometimes, late at night, I think about that mirror and the thing I saw in it. I wonder if it's still waiting, watching, whispering. I haven't spoken to Clara in months. She's changed, jumpy, paranoid, always looking over her shoulder. Sometimes I hear whispers in my own home now, faint and distant, like a memory I can't quite place. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear something moves that isn't me. Maybe the house let us leave, but I don't think it ever truly let us go.